On my wedding day, my stepsister screamed, "Stop!" But my secret letter left everyone stunned. I always thought my wedding day would be perfect. Standing before the ornate mirror in the bridal suite of New York's St. Regis Hotel, I smoothed down the ivory silk of my dress for the 100th time, watching how the fabric caught the late afternoon light. Everything was exactly as I'd planned, from the delicate lace trim of my veil to the subtle scent of gardenias that filled the room. Perfect. That word had haunted me my entire life, an impossible standard I could never quite reach. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the hidden pocket I'd sewn into my dress, feeling the crisp edge of the envelope tucked inside. The letter I'd written 3 days ago weighed heavily against my heart, both literally and figuratively. I told myself I wouldn't need it, that today would be different, that today, finally, everything would go right. 5 minutes, Miss Parker. The wedding coordinator's voice drifted through the door, professional and crisp. Soon I would no longer be Olivia Parker. I would be Olivia Williams, wife to the most wonderful man I'd ever met, Daniel. Just thinking his name brought a smile to my face, even as something twisted uneasily in my stomach. I took one last look in the mirror, trying to see myself through others' eyes. The dress was a masterpiece of understated elegance, form-fitting silk that flowed into a subtle train, the sweetheart neckline adorned with hand-sewn pearls. My dark hair was swept up in an intricate updo, small diamond pins catching the light. I looked like a bride from a magazine spread, every detail carefully curated. Perfect. But perfection, I'd learned, often hid the deepest flaws. The knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting my maid of honor, or perhaps my father. Instead, Jessica's reflection appeared in the mirror behind me, and my heart stuttered in my chest. My half-sister stood in the doorway, her bridesmaid's dress a shade of burgundy that somehow made her look both beautiful and dangerous. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. We locked eyes in the mirror, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. Determination, mixed with what looked like pity. "Olivia." Her voice was soft, almost gentle. That scared me more than if she'd been angry. Jessica was never gentle with me. "We need to talk." I turned to face her, forcing a smile. "The ceremony starts in 5 minutes, Jess. Whatever it is, can wait until after." She took a step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "No, it can't. There are things you need to know about Daniel." The twist in my stomach turned into a full knot. "Stop." I held up my hand. "I know you've never approved of him, but I love him. He loves me. Why can't you just be happy for me?" "Because he's lying to you." The words burst from her like she couldn't hold them back anymore. "I found something, Olivia. About his past, about what happened to—" "Enough." I surprised myself, with the force of my voice. "I don't want to hear it. Not today. Not ever." I touched the hidden pocket of my dress, feeling the letter inside. "You've always been jealous of my happiness, Jessica. Always tried to take away anything good in my life. But not today. Today is my day." The pity in her eyes deepened. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "Today is your day. And that's exactly why I can't let you make this mistake." She turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind her. I stood there, my heart pounding, trying to steady my breathing. The coordinator appeared in the doorway. "It's time, Miss Parker." Time. Such a simple word for such a monumental moment. I grabbed my bouquet, white roses and baby's breath, elegant and classic, and followed her out into the hallway. The sounds of the wedding march began to drift up from the grand ballroom below. My father waited at the top of the stairs, handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered as he took my arm. I smiled up at him, pushing Jessica's words to the back of my mind. This was my moment, my perfect day. Nothing could ruin it. I had no idea how wrong I was. The doors to the ballroom opened, and 200 faces turned to watch me descend the stairs on my father's arm. The room was everything I'd dreamed of. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over cream and burgundy decorations, flowers everywhere. And at the end of the aisle, Daniel. My heart skipped as I saw him, handsome in his black tuxedo, that crooked smile I loved so much playing on his lips. Step by step, I moved closer to my future. The music swelled, the scent of flowers filled the air, and for a moment, one perfect, crystalline moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Then I saw Jessica stand up from her place in the front row, her face set with the same determination I'd seen in the bridal suite, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my bones, what she was about to do. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice resonating through the hushed room. "We are gathered here today." I reached for the letter in my dress pocket, my fingers closing around the envelope, just as Jessica's voice rang out, clear and terrible. "Stop!" The perfect silence that followed was the sound of my world beginning to shatter. The murmurs started, like a wave, rippling through the crowd. I remained frozen at the altar, my bouquet trembling in my hands, as Jessica strode down the aisle. The click of her heels against the marble floor echoed like gunshots in the stunned silence. "Olivia," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "You can't marry him." I felt Daniel's hand slip into mine, warm and steady. Too steady, perhaps. I glanced at him, expecting to see confusion or anger, but there was something else in his expression, a flicker of fear, gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Jessica," my father's voice boomed from the front row. "Sit down. You're making a scene." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "A scene? You want to talk about scenes, Dad? How about we discuss the scene you made 28 years ago when you—" "That's enough." I surprised myself by speaking. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "Whatever this is about, Jessica, it can wait." She turned to face me fully then, and I saw tears in her eyes. Real tears. Jessica never cried. Not when she broke her arm at 12. Not when her mother died 3 years ago. The sight of those tears scared me more than anything else. "It can't wait," she said softly. "Because if you marry him, it might be too late." She pulled an envelope from her clutch, manila, worn at the edges, stuffed with what looked like photographs. My hand went instinctively to my own hidden letter. I'd written it as insurance, a way to protect myself if things went wrong. But now, standing here with my perfect day crumbling around me, I wondered if I'd known all along that this moment would come. "What's she talking about, Daniel?" I asked, turning to him. His hand had grown cold in mine. "She's trying to ruin this for you," he said, but he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on Jessica's envelope. "She's always been jealous of what we have." Jessica's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "Jealous? Of what? Your engagement to Rachel Cooper last year? The one that ended when she mysteriously disappeared?" The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. I felt my knees weaken, but pride kept me standing. "What?" "Don't listen to her," Daniel said quickly. Too quickly. "She's making things up." "Am I?" Jessica opened the envelope with steady hands. "I have proof. Police reports, newspaper clippings, photographs. Rachel Cooper vanished 3 days before her wedding to Daniel. Her car was found at the bottom of Lake Champlain, but her body was never recovered." The room spun around me. I remembered Daniel mentioning Rachel once, casually, as an ex-girlfriend. Just a brief relationship that didn't work out, he'd said. Nothing serious. "That's not all," Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength. Tell her about the life insurance policy you took out in her name, Daniel. Tell her about the other women. Shut up. Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. His hand released mine. And suddenly I felt very cold. My father stood up, his face ashen. Jessica, if this is about what you found in your mother's diary— Of course it is, she shot back. It's about every lie this family has ever told. Every secret we've buried. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't realize why you always favored Olivia? The pieces started falling into place. Jessica's lifelong resentment, the way my father always seemed to give me special treatment, the strange tension whenever anyone mentioned Jessica's mother. My head spun with implications I wasn't ready to face. I reached for my letter again, feeling its weight against my ribs. I'd written it 3 days ago, after finding my own set of disturbing documents in Daniel's office. Receipts for a cabin rental near Lake Champlain, a burner phone with suspicious text messages, a small key that opened a storage unit filled with newspaper clippings about missing women. I'd told myself I was being paranoid. That love meant trust, that the perfect life I'd built with Daniel couldn't be based on lies. But standing there in my white dress, watching my sister pull photograph after photograph from her envelope, I realized that perfection itself was the biggest lie of all. Show them your letter, Olivia, Jessica said quietly. Show them what you found. Daniel's head whipped toward me, and this time there was no mistaking the fear in his eyes. What letter? My fingers closed around the envelope in my dress. The paper felt like it was burning through the silk. In that moment, I had a choice to make. Cling to the perfect lie I'd built my life around, or tear it all down and face the brutal truth. I looked out at the sea of faces before me. Friends, family, colleagues, all waiting to see what I would do. My father, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Jessica, standing firm despite the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. And Daniel, the man I thought I knew, watching me with eyes that suddenly seemed to belong to a stranger. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my dress and pulled out the letter. If you want the truth, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, then let's tell it all. My hands didn't shake as I opened the envelope. They should have. My whole world was collapsing around me. But in that moment, I felt oddly calm. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was relief. The truth, no matter how painful, was better than the perfect lie I'd been living. Olivia. Daniel's voice had changed, taken on a pleading quality I'd never heard before. Whatever you think you found, let me explain. I looked up at him, really looked at him, and wondered how I'd missed the coldness in his eyes all this time. Like, you explained to Rachel Cooper? The silence in the room grew heavier. I unfolded my letter, the paper crisp and white against my trembling fingers. When I spoke, my voice carried to every corner of the ballroom. 3 days ago, I found something in Daniel's office. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for our passport papers for the honeymoon. Instead, I found these. I pulled out the first photograph. Even from the altar, everyone could see the headline. Local woman still missing. Rachel Cooper's disappearance leaves community baffled. I didn't stop there, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I found rental agreements for a cabin near Lake Champlain, dated the week Rachel disappeared, bank statements showing large withdrawals, a burner phone with messages about taking care of loose ends. Daniel took a step toward me, but my father was faster. He moved between us, his face set in lines I'd never seen before. Behind him, Jessica stood with her own evidence, her presence a silent support I never expected to have. But that wasn't all, I said, pulling out more papers. I found other articles, other women, 3 of them over the past 5 years, all in different states, all engaged to be married, all vanished without a trace. The The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. I saw several people pulling out their phones, no doubt searching for the stories I'd just mentioned. Daniel's best man had stepped away from him, horror dawning on his face. "You're making this sound worse than it is," Daniel said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. His eyes darted toward the exits. "Am I?" I turned to face our guests. 2 days ago, I hired a private investigator. In 24 hours, he found what the police couldn't, because they weren't looking at the right person. Daniel Williams isn't even his real name. It's Daniel Whitman. He changes it slightly in each state, along with enough details to avoid background checks. "That's ridiculous," Daniel snapped, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. "Olivia, you're being hysterical." "No," Jessica cut in. "She's finally seeing clearly. Show them the rest, Olivia. Show them what you found in the storage unit." I closed my eyes briefly, remembering the moment I'd opened that storage unit door. The wall of newspaper clippings, the boxes of personal belongings, jewelry, phones, small mementos. Trophies, I realized now. Souvenirs from women who had trusted him, just as I had. "The police are already on their way," I said quietly. "I called them this morning. They're bringing cadaver dogs to Lake Champlain. They're reopening Rachel's case. And this time, they know exactly where to look." Daniel moved so fast I barely saw him. One moment he was beside me, the next he was running down the aisle. But he didn't get far. The doors burst open, revealing 2 police officers in plain clothes, their badges glinting in the chandelier light. "Daniel Whitman," one called out. "We need you to come with us." The chaos that erupted was almost beautiful in its intensity. Guests jumping to their feet, cameras flashing, voices raised in shock and confusion. But through it all, I remained, standing at the altar, my letter still clutched in my hands. "There's more," I said, and somehow my voice cut through the noise. "Jessica, you said something about Dad, about what you found in your mother's diary." The room grew quiet again. My father, who had been watching Daniel's arrest, turned slowly to face me. His face had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "The diary," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. "Mom wrote about how she and Dad were already married when he had an affair. With your mother, Olivia. 9 months before you were born." The implications hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my father, silently begging him to deny it. But I saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke. "I loved your mother, Olivia," he said softly. "I loved her before I married Jessica's mother, and I never stopped. But she was married too, to a powerful man who would have destroyed her if he knew. So we kept it secret. When she told me she was pregnant..." He trailed off, the weight of decades of deception evident in his voice. "So you let everyone believe I was the product of her marriage," I finished for him. "Let Jessica grow up thinking she was your first child, your real daughter. Let her hate me for getting special treatment when all along you were his firstborn," Jessica said. "His legitimate child. While I was the secret that would have ruined his marriage if Mom had ever told anyone the truth." The irony wasn't lost on me. How we'd both grown up believing lies about our own identities. How Jessica's resentment and my desperate need for perfection had stemmed from the same tangled root of family secrets. I looked down at my wedding dress, at the perfect white fabric now crumpled from the drama of the day. In my hands, I still held the letter that had helped expose Daniel's crimes. But it was Jessica's revelation that had truly shattered my world. "I think," I said slowly, "that it's time we all stopped living lies." And in that moment, standing in the ruins of what should have been my perfect day, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The freedom that comes with finally letting the truth break you open and make you whole again. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and shocked faces. I sat in the bridal suite, the same room where I'd preened, just hours before, now transformed into an impromptu interrogation space. My perfect wedding dress felt like a costume, heavy and suffocating against my skin. "Miss Parker," Detective Sarah Chen said, her dark eyes kind but professional. "Can you walk us through how you discovered the storage unit again?" I nodded, absently fingering the pearls at my neckline. It was the key that first made me suspicious. I found it in Daniel's desk drawer when I was looking for our passport documents. It had a tag with a unit number and address, but when I asked him about it, he said it was just old furniture storage. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. He was so smooth about it, so believable, just like he was about everything else. The detective made notes in her pad. "And what made you decide to investigate further?" The way he reacted when I brought it up again the next day. There was this flash in his eyes, like a mask slipping. I closed my eyes, remembering. I've seen that look before, but I always convinced myself I was imagining things. This time, I couldn't ignore it. A soft knock at the door interrupted us. Jessica stood in the doorway, still in her burgundy bridesmaid dress, holding 2 cups of coffee. Detective Chen nodded and stepped out, giving us a moment alone. I thought, "You might need this," Jessica said, holding out one of the cups. "It's got 3 sugars, just how you like it." I stared at her, surprised. "You remember how I take my coffee?" "I remember everything about you, Olivia." She sat down beside me on the plush settee. "I spent so many years watching you, resenting you, trying to figure out why Dad loved you more. Turns out I was right about the why, just wrong about everything else." The coffee was perfect, sweet and strong, like I needed right now. "All those times you tried to warn me about Daniel, you weren't just being difficult, were you? Something about him never felt right to me." Jessica's hands tightened around her cup. "When I found Mom's diary last month, it sent me down a rabbit hole. I started investigating everything, including your perfect fiancé. The more I dug, the worse it got. Why didn't you tell me what you'd found about our father first?" The question had been burning in my mind. "Because I knew if I came to you with that, you'd never listen to the truth about Daniel." She met my eyes. "You'd be too hurt, too defensive. I needed you to see the danger you were in first." A commotion outside drew our attention. Through the window, I could see police cars pulling away, one of them presumably carrying Daniel. My almost husband. The man I'd nearly married. The man who might be a murderer. "They found something in the lake," Jessica said quietly. "That's what took them so long to get here. They've been searching since you called them this morning." My stomach lurched. "Rachel? They think so. And others." She hesitated. "The cabin rental you found. There are more properties, different states, different names, but the same pattern." I stood up abruptly, my dress rustling around me. "I need to get out of this dress. I need to not be a bride right now." Jessica rose too, reaching for the buttons at my back. "Let me help." As she helped me out of the wedding dress, I thought about all the times we'd dressed up as children. How she'd always refused to play the princess, insisting on being the dragon instead. How I'd never understood her resistance to anything pretty, anything perfect. "I get it now," I said as the dress pulled at my feet. "Why you hate perfection so much. It's just another word for lying, isn't it?" "Sometimes," she agreed, helping me step out of the fabric. "But sometimes it's just a shield, like it was for you." I pulled on the spare clothes I'd brought, simple black pants and a sweater, clothes for after the reception that would never happen. "Did you hate me? All those years?" Jessica was quiet for a long moment, carefully hanging up my wedding dress. "I wanted to," she finally said. "It would have been easier if I could. But no, I never hated you. I hated what you represented. The perfect daughter, the one who got everything I thought should have been mine. But you were just as trapped in this mess as I was. A sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Detective Chen stepped back in, her face grave. Miss Parker, we need to ask you a few more questions. About the Lake Champlain property. I felt Jessica's hand slip into mine, squeezing gently. To my surprise, I squeezed back. Actually, I said, I think we both need to hear this. And it's time you had the whole story. About Daniel, about our family, about everything. The sigh. Detective nodded, pulling up a chair. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room where I'd started my day as a bride and would end it as something else entirely. A survivor, maybe. Or just a woman finally learning to see clearly. Start from the beginning, Detective Chen said, opening her notebook. I took a deep breath, feeling Jessica's presence beside me like an anchor. The beginning, I said, was the day I met Daniel Williams, or whatever his real name is. I thought it was the start of my perfect life, but now I realize it was the beginning of unraveling all the lies, his, our father's, and even my own. As I began to tell the story, I realized that maybe this was what real perfection looked like. Two sisters, no longer divided by secrets, facing the truth together. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd planned. But for the first time in my life, it was real. The Lake Champlain cabin looked nothing like I'd imagined. In my mind, I'd pictured something sinister. Dark wood, broken shutters, the kind of place that screams murder happened here. Instead, it was cheerful, quaint. A bright blue door welcomed visitors, and window boxes still held the remnants of summer flowers. Are you sure you want to do this? Jessica asked as we pulled up in her car, gravel crunching under the tires. It had been 3 days since my almost wedding, and the police had finally cleared the property for us to visit. I stared at the cabin, remembering the rental agreement I'd found in Daniel's office. I need to see it, to make it real. Detective Chen met us at the door, her face grim. We've finished processing the scene, but... She hesitated. It's not pretty in there. She wasn't wrong. The cabin's cheerful exterior was a mask, just like Daniel's charm had been. Inside, the air felt thick with secrets. The main room was sparse, a couch, a coffee table, a kitchenette. But the basement... We found his trophy room down there, Chen said quietly as we descended the stairs. Each victim had her own section. The basement walls were lined with shelves, each containing carefully arranged items. A silver charm bracelet, a monogrammed handkerchief, a pearl necklace that looked eerily similar to the one I'd worn at my wedding, every item tagged, dated, preserved. Rachel Cooper's things are here, Chen pointed to a section near the back. But there are others we haven't identified yet. We're hoping you might recognize something. I moved closer, my heart pounding. The items were arranged like museum pieces, precious, valued. I thought of how Daniel used to arrange his books, his clothes, everything in perfect order. That same attention to detail was reflected here, in this shrine to his victims. Look at this, Jessica called from another corner. She held up a leather-bound notebook. It's his journal. Detective Chen took it carefully, pulling on latex gloves. We'll need to process this as evidence, but... She flipped it open, scanning the pages. Her face paled. He documented everything. Every woman he targeted. How he chose them, I need air, I cut her off, rushing up the stairs. Outside, I gulped in deep breaths of autumn air, trying not to be sick. Jessica followed, her hand warm on my back. I almost married him, I whispered. I almost became one of those shelves. But you didn't, Jessica said firmly. You saw through. Him. You stopped him. I turned to face her. Because of you. If you hadn't found that diary, if you hadn't started investigating, If I hadn't been so bitter about our father's secrets, I might never have started digging, she finished. Maybe some good came from all those lies after all. We sat on the cabin's front steps, watching the lake shimmer in the distance. Somewhere in those dark waters lay the answers to so many families' pain. The recovery teams were still searching, their boats tiny dots on the horizon. They found Rachel yesterday, Jessica said softly. Chen told me before you arrived. They're still looking for the others. I closed my eyes, remembering Rachel's photograph. She'd been beautiful, vibrant, so much like me. How many others do they think there are? Based on what they found in the basement? At least 5. Maybe more. Jessica pulled out her phone, showing me a news article. It's making national headlines now. Wedding day revelation leads to serial killer's capture. Other families are coming forward, recognizing his pattern. The article had a photo of me in my wedding dress, caught in the moment I'd pulled out my letter. I looked different than I remembered feeling, stronger, more determined. Below it was Daniel's mugshot, his handsome features twisted with rage. They're calling you a hero, Jessica said. I shook my head. I'm not. I'm just lucky. Lucky you found that diary. Lucky I found that key. Lucky we both decided to stop keeping secrets. Speaking of secrets, Jessica pulled something else. From her bag. Her mother's diary. I think it's time you read this. All of it. Not just the parts about our father. I took the diary hesitantly. Are you sure? Mom wrote about you too, she said. About how she knew the truth from the beginning. About how she watched you grow up, knowing you were her husband's firstborn. But here's the thing that shocked me most. She didn't hate you either. She wrote about wanting to protect you, about feeling guilty for how her bitterness affected me, about hoping someday we'd both know the truth and find our way to being real sisters. Tears blurred my vision as I opened the diary. The pages were filled with neat, careful handwriting, so much like Jessica's. I never knew, I whispered. All these years I thought she resented me as much as you did. That's the thing about assumptions, Jessica said, staring out at the lake. They're just another kind of lie we tell ourselves. A shout from the water drew our attention. One of the recovery boats was signaling. They'd found something. Another body, maybe. Another family about to get the closure they'd been seeking. We should head back, Detective Chen called from the cabin door. The forensics team needs to do another sweep. As we walked to the car, I looked back at the cabin one last time. Such a pretty place to hide such ugly truths. Just like Daniel had been such a perfect facade hiding a monster. You know what the worst part is? I said, as Jessica started the engine. A part of me still wants to believe there's a reasonable explanation. That's how good he was at making things seem perfect. Perfect isn't real, Jessica replied, pulling away from the cabin. But this is, you and me, finally being honest with each other, finally being sisters. I clutched her mother's diary to my chest, feeling the weight of its truths. Do you think we can make up for lost time? I think, she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. That time isn't what matters. It's what we do with it from here on out. As we drove away from the lake, I thought about all the women who'd trusted Daniel, who'd believed in his version of perfect. I couldn't help them now, but I could honor them by helping to uncover the truth. All the truths, no matter how painful. Behind us, the recovery boats continued their grim work, bringing secrets up from the dark water one by one. Just like Jessica and I were doing with our family's past, dredging up old pain to finally let it heal in the light. A week after my wedding that wasn't, I found myself sitting in my apartment, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd almost had. Wedding gifts waited to be returned. Thank you cards I'd pre-written mocked me from their neat stack. And everywhere there were photos. Daniel and me, smiling, happy, perfect. Each one now felt like a crime scene photo. "We don't have to do this today," Jessica said, watching me stare at a picture from our engagement party. "The police only asked for photos that might help identify other victims. We can wait." I shook my head, pulling another album from the shelf. "No, we need to do this now. Other families deserve answers." We'd developed a system over the past few hours. Every photo of Daniel went into one of 3 piles: evidence, burn, or unsure. The evidence pile was for photos that showed him in different locations, with different people, anything that might help track his movements over the years. The burn pile was for the ones I couldn't bear to look at anymore. The unsure pile was for the mysteries, the ones that made me question everything I thought I knew. "Look at this one," I said, holding up a photo from a charity gala last spring. "See the woman in the background? The one in the blue dress?" Jessica leaned closer. "She looks familiar." Her name was Catherine Mills. Daniel introduced her as an old family friend. I pulled out my phone, opening a news article I'd been avoiding. "She went missing 3 years ago, right after her engagement was announced." Jessica took the photo, her expression darkening. "I'll add it to the evidence pile. Detective Chen will want to see this." My phone buzzed. Another reporter wanting a statement. I'd turned off my social media days ago, but they still found ways to reach me. The story had exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. "The bride who caught a killer," they called. Me. As if I were some kind of hero, instead of just another woman who'd nearly become his victim. "Have you read any of them?" Jessica asked, nodding at my phone. "The articles?" "Some." I picked up another photo album. "They all want to know how I didn't see it sooner, how I could have been so blind." "That's not fair." Jessica's voice was sharp. "He fooled everyone. Professional background checks, police investigations, even Rachel Cooper's family. They all saw what he wanted them to see. But I was closer than anyone. I lived with him, slept beside him, planned a future with him." My hands trembled as I opened the album. "How did I miss the signs?" "You didn't miss them," Jessica said quietly. "You found that key. You investigated the storage unit. You wrote that letter. Deep down, you knew something was wrong." I thought back to the moments that should have warned me. The way Daniel would sometimes go cold when things didn't go his way. The mysterious business trips that never quite added up. The careful way he managed his digital footprint, always insisting on privacy. I kept making excuses, I admitted. Every time something felt off, I told myself I was being paranoid, that perfect relationships didn't exist, so I should accept the small inconsistencies. "That's what abusers count on," Jessica said, moving another photo to the evidence pile. "They use our own desire for perfection against us." A knock at the door made us both jump. Detective Chen stood in the doorway, looking exhausted but determined. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have an update. May I come in?" I gestured to the couch, clearing away some photos. "What did you find?" "The journal from the cabin? It's worse than we thought." She sat down heavily. "He documented everything, not just the murders but his methodology. How he chose his victims, how he gained their trust, how he—" She paused, glancing at me. "How he made them fall in love with him." My stomach churned. "Tell me." "He had a type. Successful women with complicated family histories. Women who were looking for perfection because their own lives had been messy. He'd research them extensively, then craft his personality to be exactly what they needed." I thought of how Daniel had seemed to understand me so completely, right from the start. How he'd known exactly what to say, what to be. "The journal mentions you," Chen continued carefully. "He wrote about finding you at that charity event 2 years ago, about learning your family history, your relationship with Jessica, your father's situation. He planned it all," I whispered, Meeting me wasn't an accident. No, Chen confirmed. But neither was his mistake with the storage unit key. We think he might have wanted to get caught, on some level. The journal entries about you are different. More conflicted. It's like you made him question his pattern. Jessica moved closer to me on the couch. What do you mean? The last entry was written the night before the wedding. He wrote about feeling torn between his mission, as he called it, and something real he thought he might be feeling for Olivia. I stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, life went on normally. People walking dogs, getting coffee, living their lives. How many of them were hiding secrets? How many were believing lies? I found something else, I said, going to my bedroom. From my dresser drawer, I pulled out a small box I'd discovered while packing Daniel's things. Inside was a single pearl. Earring. Not mine, not Rachel's. Chen took it carefully. This could be important. Where was it? Hidden in his sock drawer, wrapped in a receipt from a hotel in Vermont. I'd memorized the date. June 15th, 2022. That's right before Jennifer Blake disappeared, Jessica said, her eyes widening. The lawyer from Burlington. Chen quickly bagged the earring as evidence. This could be the connection we needed. We'll run forensics. Check. Hotel records? I sank back onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. How many more? How many other women are out there, thinking they just got their hearts broken, when really... We'll find them, Jessica promised. All of them. And we'll make sure everyone knows the truth about Daniel Williams, or Whitman, or whatever his real name is. I looked at the piles of photos surrounding us. Evidence of a life that had been carefully constructed, perfectly planned, and ultimately revealed as a deadly facade. In each smiling image, I now saw the shadow of what might have been. Me, becoming another carefully preserved trophy in a killer's basement. The truth, I said, picking up a photo and dropping it in the burn pile. That's all that matters now. As Chen left with the new evidence, I caught my reflection in the window. No more perfect bride, no more carefully maintained image. Just a woman learning to see clearly for the first time. Behind me, Jessica sorted through more photos, each one a piece of the puzzle we were slowly assembling. We had work to do, lives to save, truths to uncover. And somewhere out there, other women like me who needed to learn that perfect love shouldn't feel like walking on glass, waiting for it to break. The Vermont State Prison looked exactly like I'd imagined. All gray concrete and razor wire reaching toward a cloudy sky. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, before Jessica's gentle knock on the window startled me, back to reality. You don't have to do this, she said as I stepped out into the biting autumn air. Chen says they have enough evidence without his confession. I need to see him. I smoothed down my black blazer. No more pastels, no more perfect outfits. I need to know if any of it was real. The processing took forever. ID checks, metal detectors, forms to sign. My hands shook as I wrote my name. Olivia Parker. Not Olivia Williams. Never Olivia Williams. Remember, Detective Chen briefed us one last time in the hallway. He's likely to try to manipulate the conversation. Don't let him control the narrative. And if at any point you want to leave... I won't, I said firmly. Not until I get what I came for. The visitor's room was divided by thick glass, each station equipped with a phone. Daniel was already seated on the other side when we entered, wearing an orange jumpsuit that should have diminished his charm. It didn't. He still looked handsome, polished somehow even in prison clothes. He smiled when he saw me. That same warm, perfect smile that had made me fall in love with him. I felt Jessica squeeze my hand before I sat down. She and Chen stayed by the door, watching. I lifted the phone to my ear. "Hello, beautiful," Daniel said, his voice achingly familiar. "I've missed you." "Don't." My voice came out stronger than I expected. Don't pretend this is normal. Don't pretend you didn't plan to kill me. His smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Is that what they told you? That I was going to kill you? Olivia, you know me better than that. What we had was real. Was it real with Rachel too? I pressed my palm against the glass. With Catherine? Jennifer? How many others, Daniel? How many women thought they knew you? You're different. He leaned forward. You've always been different. Why do you think I kept that storage unit key? Where you could find it? Why do you think I left my journal at the cabin? A chill ran down my spine. Chen was right. You wanted to get caught. I wanted you to see me, he corrected. The real me. All of me. Because you're the only one who could understand. Understand what? Why you murder women who trust you? Why you keep their belongings like trophies? His expression changed then, becoming more intense. They were weak. All of them. So desperate for perfect love that they never looked deeper. But you looked deeper, didn't you? You found the key, investigated on your own, wrote that letter. You're strong, Olivia. Strong enough to be my partner, not my victim. I felt bile rise in my throat as his words sank in. You're saying you didn't plan to kill me? That you wanted to make me an accomplice instead? Think about it. His voice grew eager. The thrill of the hunt, the power of holding someone's life in your hands, the perfect execution of each detail. You've felt it now, haven't you? The excitement of uncovering secrets, of putting the pieces together. You're more like me than you want to admit. No. I pressed my hand harder against the glass. I'm nothing like you. I wanted to save lives, not take them. I wanted truth, not power. Truth? He laughed softly. Like the truth about your father, your sister. We all have darkness in us, Olivia. I just choose to embrace mine. Tell me about the others, I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. The ones we haven't found yet. Their families deserve to know. Their families, he sneered. The same families that drove them to seek perfect love from a stranger? The same kind of family that made you so desperate for approval that you almost married a man you knew was hiding something? Stop deflecting. Jennifer Blake, Burlington, June 2022. The pearl earring in your sock drawer. Where is she? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Clever girl, always so attentive to detail. That's what I loved about you. He leaned closer to the glass. Want to know a secret? There are more. Many more. And some of them aren't even dead. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Think about it. Why kill them all? Some are more valuable, alive, living their lives, never knowing how close they came, never knowing that somewhere I keep a small piece of them, a trophy for the ones that got away. His smile turned cruel. Want to know which category you would have fallen into? I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. You're going to rot in here, I said into the phone. And I'm going to find every single woman you hurt, every single one you stalked or traumatized or murdered. I'm going to make sure they all know the truth about you. The truth? He pressed his own hand against the glass, mirroring where mine had been. The truth is, you loved me. The truth is, part of you still does. That's my real trophy, Olivia. Not your pearl necklace or your wedding veil. Just knowing that every time you look in the mirror, every time you try to trust someone new, you'll remember me. Remember how perfect we could have been together. I hung up the phone with trembling fingers. Jessica was at my side instantly, supporting me as my knees went weak. Through the glass, Daniel kept smiling, kept watching. "Get me out of here," I whispered. Outside, the autumn air felt clean, purifying. I gulped it down like water, trying to wash away the taint of his words. "He's wrong," Jessica said firmly, "about you being like him, about any of it being real." "I know," but my voice shook. "Did you hear what he said about the others? The ones still alive?" Chen was already on her phone, calling it in. "We'll find them," she promised. "Every single one." I looked back at the prison, its walls now shadows against the darkening sky. Inside, Daniel sat in his cell, probably still smiling, still believing he held some power over me. And maybe he did. Maybe I would always carry a piece of this nightmare with me. But I also carried something else now. Purpose. A mission to find the others, to bring them truth, to help them heal, to turn his perfect lies into something real and meaningful. "Let's go," I said to Jessica. "We have work to do." As we drove away, I caught a last glimpse of the prison in my rearview mirror. Somewhere in there, a monster sat plotting, dreaming, remembering. But out here, his survivors were awakening, connecting, growing stronger. And I was one of them. The tips started flooding in after my interview aired on national news. I hadn't wanted to do it, but Detective Chen convinced me it might help find Daniel's living victims. So I sat under bright studio lights and told my story to millions of viewers, hoping someone would recognize themselves in my words. "Another one," Jessica said, handing me a printout as I walked into the police station's conference room. We'd been given unofficial headquarters here, helping to sort through the hundreds of leads pouring in. "Amanda Torres, Phoenix, 2019. She says he called himself David Wellington then." I scanned the email, recognizing Daniel's pattern immediately. Professional woman, family issues, recently promoted, fits his type. What made her suspicious? He left suddenly, right after she mentioned wanting to introduce him to her family. But before he disappeared, Jessica tapped the paper. He took her grandmother's antique locket, said he was having it cleaned as a surprise. "Add her to the board," I said. The conference room wall had become a massive timeline of Daniel's activities. Red pins marked his confirmed victims, the ones we'd found in Lake Champlain and other waterways. Yellow pins showed potential living victims who'd come forward. Green pins represented unconfirmed leads. The pattern stretched back almost a decade. "I got the DNA results back on the earring," Chen said, walking in with a fresh stack of files. "It's Jennifer Blake's, and we found traces of the same sedative he used on Rachel Cooper." My hand went instinctively to my own ears, remembering the pearl earrings Daniel had given me for our engagement. They were in evidence now, being tested for traces of the same drug. "Have you talked to Dad today?" Jessica asked quietly, pinning Amanda's photo to the board. "Not since Sunday dinner." Our weekly family dinners had become a new tradition. Awkward but necessary. He's still struggling with everything being public now. The article about his affair with your mom hit the local papers this morning. Jessica's voice was carefully neutral. "His law firm is concerned about the publicity." I slumped into a chair. "I should call him." "We should call him," Jessica corrected. "We're in this together now, remember?" Before I could respond, Chen's phone buzzed. Her expression changed as she listened. "They found another storage unit," she said after hanging up. "Rented under the name David Wellington, Phoenix." "Amanda Torres's David Wellington?" Jessica was already grabbing her coat. "Looks like. Local PD is waiting for us. They need..." Chen glanced at me. "They need someone who knows what to look for." I stood up, my heart pounding. "When do we leave?" "Flight's in 2 hours. But Olivia..." Chen hesitated. "You don't have to do this. You've already done more than..." "I need to." I cut her off. "These women, they're me. They're who I would have been if Jessica hadn't stopped the wedding. I need to help find them. The flight to Phoenix felt endless. I spent it reading through more emails from potential victims, each story eerily similar to my own. Daniel, or David, or Danny, or whatever name he was using, would appear at a moment of vulnerability in their lives. He'd be perfect, attentive, seemingly too good to be true. Then, just before things got serious, he'd disappear, always taking some small, precious item with him. It wasn't about the items, I said suddenly, making Jessica look up from her own files. I mean, yes, he kept them as trophies, but that wasn't the main point. What do you mean? Think about it. Amanda's grandmother's locket, Catherine's family, ring, Rachel's charm bracelet. They were all family heirlooms, pieces of their history. I pulled out my own evidence photo, the pearl necklace Daniel had given me, identical to the ones found in his trophy room. He wasn't just taking memories. He was taking their connections to their past, making them more isolated, Jessica realized, more dependent on him, more likely to accept his perfect facade without questioning. I stared out the airplane window at the darkness below, just like I did. The Phoenix storage unit was smaller than the one I'd found, but the contents were just as methodically organized. Shelves lined with carefully labeled boxes, each one containing someone's stolen history. Amanda Torres, Chen read from one box. Inside was the locket, wrapped in tissue paper, along with photographs, diary entries, notes, a complete record of their relationship. He documented everything, I said, opening another box. Every woman he targeted, every item he took, every weight. Something about the box in my hands felt familiar. Jessica, look at this. She peered over my shoulder at the name on the box. Elizabeth Miller. Mom? Jessica whispered. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was a silver bracelet I'd seen in old photographs, along with a stack of letters dated 25 years ago. That's impossible, Jessica said. Mom never mentioned. Check the dates, Chen said, reading over our shoulders. This would have been right before she married your father. I sat heavily on a nearby chair, my mind spinning. He knew. All this time, he knew about our family, about the affairs, the secrets. That's why he chose me. But how? Jessica was still staring at the bracelet. How could he have known Mom back then? He would have been a teenager, Chen finished, living in Phoenix with his mother, according to his original birth records. Elizabeth Miller would have been his neighbor. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He's been planning this for decades, learning how to manipulate people, how to use their family secrets against them. Your mom might have been one of his first. Don't. Jessica's voice cracked. Don't say victims. She survived. She got away. She married Dad and had me and kept the secret, I finished softly. Just like all his living victims did, too ashamed or scared to tell anyone. Chen was already on her phone, calling in more forensics teams, but I couldn't stop staring at the bracelet, thinking about Elizabeth Miller, the woman I'd resented. For years, believing she'd hated me. How much had that experience with Daniel shaped her? How had it influenced her decision to keep my father's secret, to protect her own marriage at all costs? We need to tell Dad, Jessica said finally. About all of it, I nodded, reaching for her hand. Together, we stared at the wall of boxes, each one containing someone's stolen truth, someone's broken trust. But maybe by bringing these stories into the light, we could start to heal more than just our own family's wounds. We will, I promised. But first, we need to find them. All of them. The living ghosts Daniel left behind. Outside, the Phoenix sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere out there, women like Amanda Torres were living with their own secrets, their own stolen pieces of history. It was time to give those pieces back, time to show them that they weren't alone, that survival didn't have to mean silence, that sometimes the most perfect thing you can be is perfectly, messily, truthfully yourself. Our father's hands shook as he held Elizabeth's silver bracelet. We were sitting in his home office, the same room where I'd played as a child, where Jessica had fought with him countless times, where so many family secrets had been kept. Now, in the soft lamplight, those secrets were finally coming to the surface. "I never knew," he whispered, running his thumb over the delicate links. "She never told me about him." "None of them did," I said gently. "That was part of his pattern. Shame, silence, isolation." Jessica sat perched on the edge of his desk, watching him with a mix of concern and uncertainty. In the week since our discovery in Phoenix, she'd barely spoken about her mother. But I'd heard her crying at night in our shared hotel room, had seen her tracing her fingers over her mother's handwriting in the old letters we'd found. "The letters," our father said suddenly. "You said there were letters?" Chen had given us copies, keeping the originals as evidence. Jessica pulled them from her bag now, handling them like they might crumble. They're hard to read, Dad. Are you sure?" He nodded, reaching for them with those still trembling hands. The room fell silent, except for the rustle of paper, as he read, his face growing paler with each page. "My dearest Elizabeth," he read aloud, his voice breaking. "I know you think marrying him is the right choice, the safe choice. But we both know you're meant for more than safety. You're meant for perfection." "Classic manipulation," I said, recognizing Daniel's tactics. He was already developing. His technique back then, finding women at vulnerable moments, offering them a glimpse of something seemingly perfect. "She was 22, our father cut in, about to start law school. We'd been dating for 6 months when suddenly he trailed off, realization dawning in his eyes. When suddenly she became distant, started talking about needing space, about not being sure if she was ready for commitment. "How long?" Jessica asked quietly. "How long did it last?" He shuffled through the letters, checking dates. 3 months based on these. Then she came back to me, agreed to marry me, and never mentioned. He looked up sharply. "The bracelet. It was her grandmother's. She told me she lost it moving into our first apartment." "He took it," I confirmed, "like he took something from all of them. A piece of their history, their connection to family." "But she got away," Jessica said fiercely. "She survived him. She built a life, had me, was happy." She stopped, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Wasn't she happy, Dad?" Our father set the letters down carefully. "She was complex. There were times when she seemed haunted by something. Especially after you were born, Jessica. She became almost obsessive about protecting you, about knowing where you were every moment." He rubbed his face tiredly. "I always thought it was because of my affair with Olivia's mother, that she was afraid of losing you too. But now we know she was carrying her own secrets," I finished. "Her own perfect lies." My phone buzzed. Another email from a potential victim. They hadn't stopped coming since the Phoenix storage unit made the news. Each one was a piece of Daniel's twisted history, a breadcrumb trail leading back through decades of manipulation and harm. "There's something else," Jessica said, pulling out her mother's diary. "Something we found last night. Mom wrote about seeing him again, years later, at a charity event in Boston, 2018. I sat up straighter. "That's where he met Catherine Mills, and where he first started planning to target you," Jessica added. "Mom saw him there, recognized him immediately. She wrote about wanting to warn someone, but she stayed silent," our father finished. like she had for all those years. She was protecting herself, I said. Protecting her family. She probably thought if she spoke up, all her other secrets would come out too. Including the truth about us, Jessica said softly. About who Olivia really was. Our father stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, rain had started to fall, drumming against the glass. I did this, he said. My affairs, my lies, they created the perfect environment for someone like him. All these secrets, all this shame. It made everyone vulnerable. No, Jessica and I said simultaneously. We looked at each other, surprised by our unity. Daniel is responsible for his own actions, I continued. He chose to prey on women at their most vulnerable. He chose to manipulate and hurt people. And Mom chose to stay silent, Jessica added. Just like I chose to stay angry all those years, and Olivia chose to chase perfection, and you chose to keep your secrets. We all made choices. But we're making different choices now, I said, standing up. We're breaking the silence. We're helping other women speak up, find each other, heal. My phone buzzed again. Detective Chen. They'd found another storage unit, this one in Boston. More boxes, more stolen treasures, more lives touched by Daniel's particular brand of evil. I need to go, I said, showing Jessica the message. Chen needs us to help process the new evidence. Our father turned from the window. Go, he said. Do what needs to be done, but... He hesitated. Come back for Sunday dinner, both of you? Jessica picked up her mother's diary and the copies of the letters. We'll come back, she promised. We have a lot more to talk about. As we drove to the airport through the rain, Jessica was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. Do you think we'll ever know the whole truth? About Mom? About Daniel? About any of it? I thought about the growing wall of evidence in the police station, the boxes of stolen memories, the women slowly finding their voices after years of silence. I think the truth isn't one single thing, I said carefully. It's like this investigation. Pieces coming together, patterns emerging. Sometimes the full picture isn't what we expected, but it's real, she finished. Not perfect, but real. Like us, I added, glancing at her. She managed a small smile. Like us. Ahead, lightning split the sky, illuminating the road ahead. Somewhere in Boston, more pieces of this puzzle waited to be found. More truths waited to be uncovered. And maybe, just maybe, more healing waited to begin. 1 year to the day after my almost wedding, I stood in front of a different crowd in a different room. No white dress this time. No perfect flowers or carefully curated guest list. Just me, in a simple black suit, facing a room full of women who shared a bond none of us had ever wanted. My name is Olivia Parker, I began, my voice steady. And like all of you, I survived Daniel Whitman. The support group had been Jessica's idea. After the Boston storage unit revealed another 20 potential victims, we realized these women needed more than just justice. They needed each other. They needed to know they weren't alone. Amanda Torres sat in the front row, her grandmother's locket once again around her neck. Catherine Mills was there too, finally ready to tell her story after years of silence. And in the back, watching, with tears in her eyes, sat Jessica. For years I chased perfection, I continued. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, love perfectly enough, live perfectly enough, I could keep the darkness at bay. What I didn't realize was that perfection itself was the darkness, the lies we tell ourselves, the secrets we keep, the parts of ourselves we hide away in shame. The door opened quietly, and I saw my father slip in, taking a seat next to Jessica. They'd grown closer over the past year, working through their own pain and secrets. The weekly family dinners had become a true tradition now, full of honest conversations and gradual healing. Daniel Whitman preyed on our desire for perfection, I said. He studied us, learned our weaknesses, our family histories, our deepest fears. He crafted himself into exactly what each of us needed, and then he took pieces of us as trophies, physical objects. Yes, the jewelry, the family heirlooms, the precious memories. But more than that, he took our trust, our ability to believe in love, our faith in our own judgment. I looked at the wall behind me, where photos of all the known victims were displayed. 37 women over 25 years. Red pins for the 8 we'd found in various lakes and rivers. Yellow pins for the living, the ones who'd come forward, and white pins for the 4 who were still missing. But we're taking those pieces back, I said firmly. Every time one of us speaks up, every time we share our stories, every time we choose truth over silence, we reclaim what he tried to steal. We turn our shame into strength, our isolation into community, our perfect lies into messy, beautiful truth. Catherine raised her hand, her voice shaking slightly. How do you do it? Trust again, I mean. After everything? I thought about the question carefully. I start small. I trust my sister, who saved me from becoming another red pin on that wall. I trust my father, who's learning that real love can survive imperfection. I trust all of you, who understand what it's like to survive someone like Daniel. And mostly, I trust myself, my instincts, my feelings, even my fears. Especially my fears. Amanda touched her locket gently. I kept waiting for someone to blame me, for not seeing through him, for being fooled. But being here, hearing everyone's stories, he was just that good at what he did, wasn't he? He was, I agreed. But we're better. We're stronger. Look, around this room. Lawyers, doctors, executives, artists. Strong, successful women who he thought he could break. But we're still here. We're still standing. Jessica stood up then, walking to join me at the front. And we're still finding others, she added. Every new story that comes out helps another woman recognize what happened to her, helps another family understand what their loved one went through. I reached for her hand, drawing strength from her presence. Daniel Whitman will spend the rest of his life in prison. He'll never hurt another woman. But his real punishment is this: us standing together. Us refusing to be silent. Us turning his perfect lies into something real and meaningful. Later that night, Jessica and I sat on my apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the city lights. My engagement ring was long gone, sold to help fund the support group. In its place, I wore Elizabeth's silver bracelet, a gift from our father, a symbol of secrets brought to light. Do you ever miss it? Jessica asked suddenly. The perfection, I mean. The fantasy of it all. I thought about Daniel's journal, about his detailed plans for our life together, how he'd studied me for months before we met, crafting himself into my perfect match, how close I'd come to becoming another trophy in his collection. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, I admitted, when everything was black and white, when I thought I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. But now it's all complicated and messy and real? Exactly. I smiled at her. Like us. My phone buzzed. Detective Chen. They'd found another storage unit, this one in Chicago. Tomorrow we'd fly out there, continue the work of uncovering truth, of bringing light to dark places. Tomorrow we'd add more pins to the wall, more stories to the growing tapestry of survival and strength. But tonight, sitting here with my sister, I felt something I'd never found in all my years of chasing perfection. Peace. Not the false peace of carefully maintained facades, but the real peace that comes from finally, truly being known. To truth, Jessica said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers, watching the city sparkle below us. To truth. In all, its perfect imperfection. And somewhere in the night, I imagined other women sitting just like this. Survivors sharing their stories. Families healing their wounds. Truth breaking through the silence like stars emerging after a storm. Not perfect but real. Not flawless but free. And in the end, that was everything. The end. Thanks for watching to the end. Did you like the story? Tell us what you thought in the comments below. We want to know what you think. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe now for more exciting stories you won't want to miss. Activate the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. See you in the next story. See you there.